But it's just a farmer who thinks about things in terms of business.
Okay.
So, what I'm curious about is you had talked about the mandatory pool
Yes.
situation, and I guess I'm curious to just get your read on it. There's a couple more steps it has to go through, but it's looking more and more to me like this is just the deal going forward, and it's something the industry has to get used to. Is that your kind of sense of it as well, or?
Unless they enact new legislation and therefore new regulations, this is going to be the law going forward so long as cool is a part of the ag bill. So there will be mandatory country of origin labeling for meats and for fruits and for vegetables and for some nuts and for seafood. And so that's just the law going forth. And the question is, will the consumers respond favorably to it or unfavorably? I tend to think personally that consumers, at least in the U.S., want a wide variety of high quality, inexpensive food available year round. They want it when they want it, and they want it inexpensively.
Yeah.
And if cool and everything else keeps that in place, then I think there'll be no reason to change it.
Right. So they're thinking, like they're more interested in what's there, what's available, what's readily. They're not really interested. Is this? I'm going to say a BlackBerry from Argentina versus a BlackBerry from somewhere in California,
Okay.
or
If it was a BlackBerry from Argentina and Argentine BlackBerries just had a health scare, then they'll care for the next few months.
Right.
Take the example of Guatemalan berries back in the 90s. There was a scare. They had some kind of a problem with them, and it caused some sicknesses. They got into the school lunch program. Basically, these berries were out of the U.S. market, and only in the last couple of years have they come back in. Some penalties are longer than others. Cantaloupes out of Mexico had a salmonella problem back around 2001, 2002. They lost their market. Central America came in and took that market. They're not letting Mexico have that back. So to the extent that handlers and consumers get leery of a certain product, the impact may be short-lived, may be long-lived. And people pay more attention when it's fresh on their mind. After a while, a lot of people just tend to forget it.
Now, it seems to be a particular issue for the beef industry, or for the meat industry, I should say. Let me backtrack there. Ironically, because they were so well integrated
Right.
within North America, so it was largely seamless, and there was never any attention sort of paid to the provenance of the animals. Like they could be Mexican, they could be Canadian, they could be U.S. They go through a U.S. plant, they'd be inspected in the U.S.
Right.
And assuming they met the grade standards, they'd be graded as U.S. what have you.
Right.
And that situation is now changing. So the concern there, like the real concern, it seems, is one of sort of the ability of the industry to adapt and the willingness of the industry to adapt. Is that correct?
Well,
Like
the industry's already adapting. Okay, they're adapting in pork. Some firms are saying just no more Canadian hogs, no more Canadian even feeder pigs being turned into hogs in the U.S. and slaughtered. The industry is going to adapt to what's going to be easiest for the industry and most efficient, most money-making for the industry. To the extent, could you repeat the first part of your question? The laughter kind of.
Yeah, as I say, I was curious about how the industry is adapting,
Right.
and I guess if I could get you to sort of further comment on it, it's like the adaptation you talk about is for the industry, not for the producers.
Right.
So, and that's, I guess, perhaps the part that the producers don't really like.
Well, the Canadian producers probably don't like it at all. The U.S. producers tend to think that it will raise the value of their live animals, so they're happy with it. Whether the hog or the steer comes in from another country, or whether it's processed from the U.S. Once it's processed, once it's meat, it will be inspected. It will have the USDA stamp on it. The only difference is what label it will have at retail. If it's shown that consumers are willing to pay even a slight premium for U.S. only product, then then the processors and the retailers will find it beneficial to them. If they can't, if that's not the case, then those costs are going to have to be pushed back. And so even maybe U.S. producers won't be as happy because they'll be getting less for their hogs because, or their cattle because consumers, due to the ability to select, will not want to pay higher prices. The fact that this is not applicable to products sold in restaurants, for instance, is a huge competitive advantage for them, because you go into McDonald's or you go into TGI Fridays, and it doesn't have to state where the meat in your hamburger is from. Mm-hmm. You go to the grocery store, it's got to state that. The question is, will the meatpacking industry develop production lines just for the restaurants versus production lines just for the grocery? If they do that, that's more cost for them. Again, more cost that if you can't push them up to the consumer, you got to push them back.
Yeah. So it seems like again and again the simple and elegant solution from the perspective of the packer, it really is, we're not taking Mexican and Canadian product.
Well, that is more prevalent with respect to Canadian hogs. Cattle, there's still quite a bit coming across the border. That's more dependent upon herd size at any given time. The fact that we're in a slight recession right now, or even if you wanted to call it a big recession, the fact that we're in an economic downturn right now and demand isn't quite as high, it's less of a factor. Demand gets back up, they'll need to draw in cattle from wherever they need to draw in cattle from, and you know that has a lot more to do with the economic situation than it has to do with country of origin labeling or anything like that.
Right. Now, you spoke a little bit during your presentation about some of the impacts, and it sounds like they're already, especially in the pork sector, fairly good size. We talked about that one processor that wasn't taking any.
Well, you've actually got two.
Okay.
You've got two. You've got James Morrell or John Morrell. I can't remember the name. Morrell Company, which is part of Smithfield, not accepting any hogs. Barn or even barn and raised in Canada, or even barn in Canada and raised in the U.S. to run through their plants. Hormel was accepting, they quit accepting hogs that were raised in Canada but slaughtered to be slaughtered in the U.S., but they had been accepting hogs that were born in Canada and fed out in the U.S. And the way I understand it, as of the end of July, they're not going to do that anymore. Between those two companies, that's 38,000, 39,000 hogs per week of processing capacity that Canadian hogs no longer have access to. So I kind of divided this up into three scenarios that Canadian, specifically the swine and pork sector, might consider. They could try to stick with the commodity structure that's currently in place. They could try to develop some niche markets, at some higher value, do more processing here in Canada, and do more marketing, so as to Canadian bacon on pizzas in the U.S. is a very very positive thing for the label Canadian bacon. Canada's got some very good, they're perceived quite well in the U.S. I think that they could turn that into a marketing plus for them, and then further expand their export markets. They've been doing that recently, and they need to continue doing that, because you never can, if you're too dependent on one country, even though it's a big market, when they change the rules, it can hurt you.
And we talked about that a little bit yesterday when we weren't on camera. You were talking about, you understand why they went to this market. It's a good market. It's the right next door market. It's
right.
There are a lot of compelling reasons to do it. But I think your point is taken, that there's some danger to that, because there's only one regulatory regime that needs to change, and a big portion of your market's wiped out.
Right. And my thought is, and I may be off the mark a little bit, if U.S. consumers are willing to pay a premium for certain products, you might want to go with the niche market, because then then the marketing efforts would be worth it in terms of a higher price. Okay? If they're not willing to pay a premium, then you still might want to try to fit your product in to the commodity type sector as much as possible. Either way, you need to work on expanding your export market base.
That's really what it boils down to, is diversification, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Great. Thank you so
Thank
much,
you.
Glenn.
My
Much
pleasure.
appreciated.